everyone. My name is Kathy Gunst, also a Harvard professor. Thanks for being here tonight. Tonight, I am very, very pleased to have Jessica Fechtor and Kathy Gunst with us to discuss Jessica's memoir, Stir, My Broken Brain and the Meals That Brought Me Home. Stir will alternately make you tear up and make your mouth water. Please join me in welcoming Kathy Gunst and Jessica Fechtor.
Thank you. Ooh, can you all hear me? That was a very good introduction. I don't think I have anything else to say. I will say that this is a huge honor. I told Jess 2 weeks ago on a gorgeous June Saturday, my husband was in the garden and I said, I'll be right there. You know, it was time to weed. And I just did a little detour to the mailbox and there was Stir. And I ripped open the package because I had met Jess like a year before and heard about this book. And I sat on my porch and started to read it, and my husband screamed, "Are you coming?" And I'm like, I'm coming. And like, I could not put this book down, so you're all in for a big treat. Well, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Wow, what a crowd. I guess the place to start is at the beginning. The illness. All these horrible words: brain aneurysm, multiple surgeries, helmets, loss of smell, blindness in one eye, loss of part of your skull and forehead. My goal tonight is not to cry, okay? That's like a big goal. This is just heavy stuff. So take us through it a little bit and set it up, and maybe you could read to us from the beginning, like 1 through 4.
Sure. Should I start with that? Because that's kind
It
of
does
where
tell the story,
yeah.
sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read to you now from the prologue. Hello, everyone, by the way. Thank you so much for coming. So this book, Stir, it's the story of my recovery from a ruptured brain aneurysm when I was 28 years old, and how I reclaimed my life through food and cooking. The prologue just begins where it begins. I am on the floor. My back is flat against the ground, and so are the soles of my feet, and my knees are up and swaying. Someone is holding my head at the temples. Jessica, it's Alana. She says it the Canadian way with a flat first A, lavish, lamb, Atlantic. My knees are swaying. I turn my head and vomit into her lap. The hotel gym guy comes with orange Gatorade. He is tall and waxy with a bird face and dark hair that's more thin and thinning. He wants to know if I've had any breakfast. A banana, I tell him, and he nods as though he suspected as much. He bends at the waist and wags the bottle over my face for me to take it. I vomit again. Alana doesn't flinch. I'm at a graduate student conference in Stowe, Vermont, a town wedged deep in the valley between the Green Mountains and the Worcester Range. I am 28 years old. Alana is a colleague. I've seen her at these conferences over the last couple of years, and we've shared meals, but that's all. I'm grateful for the pad of her thigh. I see my friend Orr. We'd planned to run together along the country roads that morning, but a crack of thunder had sent us to the gym instead. He stands over me now in a tank top with a bandana tied low across his forehead. He looks like a pirate and says he's going to call. The gym guy insists it's not necessary, but Orr calls. An ambulance is coming. It's August and the sky is dark from the storm. I don't try to get up. I don't even think to try. It will be years before I realize the oddness of that, and no one offers to help me. Alana is talking to me, and Orr is talking to me, and Orr and Ilana are talking to each other about me, and the girl who was on the treadmill next to mine is talking to someone, the gym guy maybe, about what happened. I can hear the spit moving around in her mouth as she speaks. She sounds breathless and scared, and I want her to be quiet. Someone at the opening session the night before had mentioned that he was training as an EMT, and they bring him in. He looks me in the eye, expressionless, then steps away. My knees are swaying. I've had migraines before. The pain feels similar, so I assume that's what this is. I've never fainted, though, and it has never come on so fast. A flash migraine, then? Is that a thing? I can't decide if I'm supposed to be scared. Orr is asking me whom he should call, and I tell him my dad, no, Ellie. I give him my husband's number and watch him dial. My head hurts so badly, and I think that if I can relax my body, get really quiet, I can make it better. Alana says she's not talking anymore. The paramedic arrives. He shines lights and asks if I remember the fall, and I do. I was running on the treadmill when I felt a painless click in my head. There was an odd trickling sensation along my skull, like a rolling bead of sweat, but on the inside. Then the room went gray and the earth sucked me down. I knew I was about to faint. The red stop button seemed suddenly far away. I swiped at it, but there was no time to step off the machine. Someone says I hit my head on the way down, and I wonder if the belt was still moving when I fell. I can no longer sway my knees, the paramedic's in the way, so I start rubbing his leg instead. I'm sorry, I say, I'm rubbing your leg. That's all right, you keep rubbing. He tells me to fold my arms across my chest, that they're going to strap me to a board and carry me to the ambulance. It's very important, he says, to call out if I need to vomit, so that they can flip me over in time. The thought of that, of hanging face down in the air and vomiting, the thought of being dropped, is at this moment the most terrifying thing in the world. I start this story here on the floor of a conference center gym because it now seems the most obvious place. But it wasn't obvious to me then that a start had occurred at all. I thought my fall from the treadmill was a dot on a plot line already underway. The one about the literature student at a conference who fainted, missed the morning's events, got checked out and returned, red-faced and sheepish in time for lunch. I didn't know then that when I slipped from that moving belt, that dot had also slipped and become its own point A. What a click in my head and a moving belt and a headache that knocked me down might have to do with butter and flour and eggs at room temp and hunger and love and a kitchen with something to say I couldn't have known that day. How a detour could become its own path, I would never have believed.
So I'm in awe just in those few pages of how there's humor in this extremely dire situation and the attention to detail, the spit moving around, that these are the kind of weird, random details that stay in your head when this very terrible, and you weren't even clear how terrible thing was beginning. So, do you want to talk more about this?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I write about in Stir is about how trauma is supposed to serve as like a merciful eraser that wipes away what the body most needs to forget. But in my case, I really do have very sharp memories, even of the earliest stages.
Well, actually, we can jump around, because I have also always heard that we erase pain. Otherwise, no one would have more than one child, right? And so here you are being forced to remember pain and remember it in great detail and specificity. And I guess, first of all, I just wondered how painful it was to revisit all that and how your recall worked.
Okay, so I'll take the second part of the question first, how my recall worked. So I thought when I found out that I had the chance to write this book that I would basically sit down and write it. I knew already what had happened, and so I would sit down and I would write the story. But of course, I didn't have the story yet, because if you've ever read Vivian Gornick's book on writing, The Situation and the Story, she differentiates between those two things. And I had the situation, really, not the story. I had a series of plot points, so I knew what happened, but it was up to me to figure out what the story was, and it really not, just like they say, there's not just one person for everyone. There's not just one story. In fact, I think there are probably infinite stories within any given situation or series of plot points. And so I needed to first, before I could sit down and write it, or in the process of sitting down and write it, I needed to figure out what the story was. So my way of doing that was, instead of starting at the beginning, I started writing down episodes, things that I remembered. I was kind of like a crazy maniac person. What's that movie, A Beautiful Mind? Is that right? My husband, Ellie, is here somewhere, and he would like look at my piles of note cards and my notebooks and my things taped to the wall, and he was like, "You are from A Beautiful Mind." Basically, any time I remembered anything, I would write it down and then kind of try to flesh out the episode as best as I could, and then it sounds mystical, but I don't know how else to put it. I waited for the story to kind of come up and meet me. And this is why, actually, first of all, this is why it took me a long time to write it. And this is why so much ended up on the cutting room floor, because I was writing and writing and writing for a good year out of order. And then, only then was I really able to figure out, having written a lot of what the book was not, what it actually is.
Can we back up another second? What made you want to tell this?
Well, at first I didn't want to tell this. So some of you, I think, because I don't know a lot of you, so if you're here, maybe some of you have read my blog. Yes? Maybe? Yes? Okay. So if you've been reading, thank you for coming, and I feel like I actually know you in a weird way, but if you were reading from the very beginning, then you know that I did not mention my illness on the blog. We'll get there, but I started the blog a few months after I had returned home from the hospital, and it was my way of saying to my family and friends, I want to talk about something else now, not bloody brains, not illness. And I didn't mention my illness on the blog until it was 9 months in, and I had a big surgery coming up, and for various reasons, which we can get into if it's interesting, I decided to come out on the blog, so to speak, and explain what was going on. And it was after that point when I actually, I was contacted by some literary agents when I wrote this post saying, here's what's been going on behind the screen, and thank you, and really, thank you for being with me through all of that, to all of my readers. And they wanted me to write some kind of illness and recovery story. And I was not interested in that because, first of all, I know this sounds crazy, and I'm not trying to be, I don't know what the word is, coy, but what I went through, it was harrowing, and there is material there, and there's stuff to learn from. But in terms of illness and recovery stories, there are ones I think that are probably far more worth telling. And I felt that I didn't have something really specific to add to the illness and recovery literature. And it wasn't for another year after a bunch of things happened, and I got some distance from it, and some questions started to arise for me related to illness and recovery, but not only about illness and recovery, that made me think, you know what, I want to delve in a little bit. I think there's something to learn, and that had to do with food, figuring out why food was so important to me, why food and cooking were so important to me during my illness and recovery. And I realized that I didn't really know why, or I thought I knew, but I wasn't really sure. And for me, the way to get clarity on anything in general in life is to write about it. And I contacted my current literary agent, who seemed very interested in a book that would be more in that vein. And she helped me put together a proposal for a book that would be the book that I would want to write.
So I'm just imagining this proposal, like brain aneurysm cookbook, recipe, surgery, and you solved it, because here we are.
Here we are.
Okay, so let's stick on the topic of food. Illness and food are very strange bedfellows. Many people, when they're ill, turn far away from food. It's the last thing they want to talk about. It's the last thing they want to think about. But food and the act of putting together ingredients proved to be probably one of the single most healing aspects of your story. And your love of food and cooking comes through so clearly in this book. Even if you had never read the blog, it's all right there. So maybe take us through, maybe start with the buttermilk biscuits, or even your first cup of tea, of why it was so important to get back into the kitchen and how that became kind of a Geiger counter for like when you were close and when you were far away.
Sure. Well, I should probably go back and explain a little bit about the vision thing. And
Sure.
is that okay? All right.
Is that okay? It's your story.
Is that okay? But you're Kathy Gunst.
You're Jessica. Go. Go ahead. You can say anything you want.
So I'm going to go back just to explain a little bit more deeply about the nature of my illness and the injuries that came as a result of the surgeries. Oops. Uh-oh. Where does this go? Sorry.
It goes here. I'm going to let her do it.
Okay.
This is going to be a good moment.
I'm not even here.
Yeah, you can actually keep
Okay, I will keep talking. Thank you. Right. So when I fell from that treadmill, it took a little while to figure out that it was an aneurysm that had caused the bleeding in my brain. And when they did, I had a surgery to repair the ruptured aneurysm, an open brain surgery where they cut. Watch carefully. This will become an important visual. I had this part of my forehead and head. It's called they saw it in and they opened me up, and that piece that they take out, that's called the bone flap. Remember that. And they went in and they put a clip on the aneurysm that had ruptured, and that surgery was successful. And when I woke up, I could not see out of my left eye, and that's because my left optic nerve was compressed during the surgery. And despite a surgery that they're working on to try to help that nerve to recover, I did not regain vision in my left eye. And the deficit that you have to deal with when you are missing one eye, missing the vision in one eye, is depth perception. So, because depth perception at close range is a binocular phenomenon. So I would, have a cup of tea on my hospital bed and go to put it down, and I would completely miss the table, and it would go crashing to the floor. So that was the first complication, but I was told by my neurosurgeon that it would take a year or longer, but that my brain would remap, and that one day I would barely notice the deficit, and that is true. But it took time, slowly, over probably a little over a year. Then, after I returned home from this surgery, an infection set in. And the bone flap, this piece that was right here, it became so infected that they actually had to remove it and throw it away. So I had a big dent in my head. If you picture a basketball or a soccer ball that is a little bit deflated, if you were to punch it and it keeps its form, that's what I looked like. And they kept that bone flap out for a year to make sure that the infection wasn't very quiet and more or less invisible, and to make sure it was truly gone. And then they patched me up on a day, I think it was my dad who dubbed it Humpty Dumpty Day, I'm pretty sure. So on Humpty Dumpty Day, August 9th, I believe, or August 3rd, something like that. 2009, they put a prosthetic piece in and they patched me up, and there were actually things that followed, but we don't need to get into that here. It's in the book. So we thought that was the last surgery. But to go back to Kathy's question, and I'm sorry, when they scraped out the infection, I woke up from that surgery missing my sense of smell, which they said would not return, and did. So to answer Kathy's question about food and how food could possibly be appetizing, to say the least, and actually something that was quite important during this time. First of all, the kitchen itself was an arena for my physical recovery, I think. because I had that depth perception issue, and because I had been so weak from the infection, and missing my piece of head, I was actually they prescribed a hockey helmet for me to wear. So I was learning how to crack eggs into a bowl and actually get them in the bowl and not on the counter next to the bowl. And I just remember feeling. My friend Julia is here, and I remember she came over early on with her husband Eitan, who's also here somewhere. And I remember when it was time to clear the table, and I write about this in Start, Julia picked up the plates and carried the plates into the kitchen, and I was like, whoa, she looked so beautiful, like a dancer, doing this. I guess to go back a little bit, I thought that the fastest route back to myself was going to be to pick up exactly where I had left off. I was in the middle of a PhD program in Jewish literature. I had been studying for my doctoral exams when the aneurysm ruptured, and once I was strong enough, I thought I'll try to study again. And for the first time ever, it just wasn't clicking for me. And I didn't know, am I brain damaged, or is this just a lack of concentration that I was told would stick around for 6 to 8 months? I called my dad, and I was crying, and I called my friend Megan, and I said, I can't study, I don't know what's wrong with me. And my friend Megan came to visit, and I told her that even worse than feeling so alienated from my work was feeling alienated from my everyday. The kind of thing like watching Julia, sweep up these dishes as if she's in Swan Lake from my eyes, and carrying them into the kitchen. I missed being able to do that. I missed all of the little things that make us who we are, like getting to just wake up in the morning and hop out of bed and go into the kitchen. And we all have our routines. We set the water to boil while we put the toast in the toaster oven, while we open the fridge and get all of those things, all of the life that goes around food, goes on around food. I was really missing that, and it was my friend Megan who said, why don't you start a food blog? And that was when my love for food, it just became a more conscious kind of thing. It heightened my awareness about food and cooking, and the fact that my kitchen had something to tell me. And really, getting into the kitchen then was my way, I think, of registering the little bits of normal life that were starting to sprout up around me again as I regained my strength, registering these things and believing in them once again.
Well, you say, the act of cooking for many, myself included, is the biggest gift that you can give someone, to make a beautiful meal and sit at a table and share food with them. But you say that cooking, and I quote, gave me my generosity back, something my illness robbed me of. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure, yeah. So I say that about baking, right?
Oh,
actually,
specifically.
Yeah, specifically baking. And the reason why I make the distinction is because you can cook for one, right? That's not so hard. You can make anything, scale it down pretty much. Stir fry, scale it down. Half a squash, like I like to do. Put it in the oven, roast it, and sprinkle it with salt and pepper, olive oil, and that's dinner for one, no problem. But baking, I don't care how big your sweet tooth is, you cannot eat the entire cake yourself.
She doesn't think you like it.
So, by definition, except for in Kathy Gunst's kitchen,
I don't bake that much.
You bake to share. But by definition, again, if you have enough flour and sugar and eggs to bake, because again, we don't need cakes and cookies. I know. But if we have enough, then we throw it into cookie batter and cookie dough and cake batter. This was something that I figured out again, as I was writing. It was really hard to not be able to feel generous at all when I was sick. It was, I think, like a lot of us, we feel uncomfortable with people doing for us. And when you're in the situation as I was, where, I mean, at the beginning, my mother was with us in the first weeks when we were home from the hospital, and then my stepmom came, my dad came. We had this army of people who were coming through. I needed help toileting myself, bathing myself, just the littlest things. And yes, I felt that I had been robbed of my generosity. And when I was able to bake again, I remember, you know, it was bit by bit these pretty simple recipes, and then kind of this triumphant moment that I write about in the book. I mentioned Eitan a second ago, who was here, a friend of mine and a character in the book. He had a birthday, and he requested something with whipped cream and custard and strawberries, and I knew right away this was a Cleveland casata cake, a strawberry custard cream layer cake that I had to figure out how to make for him, and I did, and it was just an incredible moment, however many months into my recovery, to realize that I could do that again for the people who I loved and people who had given so generously to me.
Well, I think part of being an adult is that we take care of ourselves, and being a giving, loving person, it's very hard to take. And so you found that with food you could do this give back. Do you want to, I mean, the other remarkable thing about this book, for those of you who haven't read it, is how beautiful the food writing is. There's this narrative about this brain aneurysm and illness and recovery, but the food writing is really sharp. You want to pick it up on 16? Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is the beginning of chapter 2. When I tell people that I am writing the story of a bloodied and broken brain, and oh, by the way, there will be recipes too, I get some strange looks. Food is not supposed to top the list of things you think about, apparently, when you're recovering from a near-fatal brain explosion. The thing is, I did think about food, a lot. And it's not really all that strange. Thinking about food means thinking about everything that goes on around it. The dash from the breakfast table out the door, the conversations that shape us, the places and faces that make us who we are. What, besides food, could I think of that would encompass my life so roundly? Illness takes away plenty of big things. You can't work, you can't play. Worst of all, though, is the way it robs you of your everyday. That's true whether you're sick for 3 months or 3 days. If you've ever had a shower after a fever breaks, a first bite of solid food, traded your bathrobe for your favorite sweater, then you felt it too. Getting well means finding your everyday. I found mine in the kitchen. In the years before I got sick, I spent a lot of time in there. Kitchen business is physical. That was important to me during my first healthy years of graduate school. After swimming around and around in my brain all day long, looping through the library after each paragraph written or chapter read so that I could remember what my legs were for, I wanted nothing more than to rub butter into flour, to feel the mild burn in my wrists and dough between my fingertips. I brought cakes to seminars, soups to neighbors, and mailed biscotti to faraway friends. I talked about food with anyone who would listen. I wrote about it too, in the margins of my research notebooks, the pages of my journal, and summertime missives sent from study programs abroad. Food has powers. It picks us up from our lonely corners and sits us back down together. It pulls us out of ourselves to the kitchen, to the table, to the diner down the block. At the same time, it draws us inward. Food is the keeper of our memories, connecting us with our pasts and with our people. A parsnip, for me, is Friday nights. It's a soup pot, simmering with a chicken inside, silk curtains, and my grandmother, smelling brothy, salted, and sweet. But there's also something simpler going on, I think, namely, that it feels so good to eat. Because we're hungry, yes, but also because food allows us, in some small way, to act out who we are. My aunt puts cream in her ginger ale. I put peanut butter on a spoon, and cottage cheese on baked potatoes, and milk in tea, and yogurt on top of granola, not the other way around. My brother has a recipe: mustard, bread, mustard sandwich. Ellie comes from a family that puts ketchup on pasta and fries French toast in oil. He cuts off the crusts and saves them for last, and eats them like breadsticks with jam. Food, like art, like music, brings people together, it's true. It begins, though, with a private experience, a single person stirred, moved, and wanting company in that altered state. So we say, "You have to taste this." We say, "Please take a bite." It is a pleasure not only to taste, but to have taste, to feel our preferences exert themselves. It feels good to know what we like, because that's how we know who we are.
Beautiful. So I want to just, wow, time goes fast.
Wow.
I want to shift gears. I want to talk about fear.
Okay.
I Googled you, and there's a photograph on your website. You're about to blow out a candle, and I think it's Ellie, is your husband in the picture? And he's pointing to a piece of paper that says, "No fear." No, it's not your husband.
No, it is. I made that face because we made that for a good friend of ours who, it was her birthday, and we wanted to give her that message, and she's in the back. Hi, Steph.
I had a whole other take on it. Well, but clearly, the idea of fear, going through something this traumatic, how does fear play into your life now, and what do you do with it?
Well, I'll say a couple of things about fear. The first is that, this connects with the question you asked earlier about the role of food and this reclaiming of my everyday. If you read the book, you'll learn that there was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of like, you're okay, you're not okay, you're okay, you're not okay. And that to me was the worst part. Worse than the surgeries, worse than being told I might die, worse than anything. Because it just really messed with me and just really made me wonder, how can I have confidence in my own body? How can I have confidence in these world-class doctors? My own husband, who knows me so well, my family. If everyone is so nervous and tells me I'm fine and then I'm not fine, how could I really be fine? And what I learned is that there was no one outside of me who was going to be able to tell me you're okay. There was no test, no angiogram, none of that was going to be able to give me the confidence and kind of drain me of that fear. It really was about that everyday, bit by bit, seeing myself again, feeling myself again, just doing my thing, in the world. And that, I think, is a way that food and cooking ties in there in terms of fear. Also, I'm kind of a weirdo. My stepmom wrote me an email before this and mentioned that, among other things, which I won't explain, but she's looking at me like, what? It's very personal. But mentioned, my way of kind of taking something terrible in general. Nothing I'd ever had as terrible as this aneurysm, but my history of taking things that are maybe not so wonderful and always looking at them with, making the best of them and thinking of them not necessarily as tragedies or even hurdles. And the thing is that, that's a compliment. And on the other hand, like, I'm a little bit crazy, I think, in that respect, especially when I look back to, for example, an early moment that I write about here where I was in the emergency department my first day there in Vermont. And they knew that there was blood in my brain. They didn't know why it was there. And this doctor came over to me, this very handsome South African doctor. Details. And he's explaining to me what's going on. And he had some signs for me some forms for me to sign. And I said, could I die? And he looked at me straight in the eye, very bravely, I think, and said, yes. And oddly, it did not, I didn't feel panicked or anxious or scared. I actually felt something like relief. And I think that's because in my brain, the way that I'm wired, I heard it as, yes, you might have, but now you're here. Yes, it's highly likely, but now that you are in our able hands, and we're scanning you, and we will fix you. So oddly,
so you heard him, but you decided to just give it a positive twist.
But I didn't decide. That's really the point. It's like, like when my stepmom says it about me, I'm like, it's not a choice, It's just kind of like the way. And
do you still feel that way?
Well, no. That's the thing. I mean, so all the way through it, like there came this point at the end, and after that Humpty Dumpty day, there was actually more, that surgery, there was an administrative error. One of the surgeons who was supposed to be there, the plastic surgeon who was going to make me not only be fixed, but actually look fixed, didn't show up. And so I ended up still with this big deficit. There ended up being another surgery. And I really kind of lost it at that point. And I remember saying to my dad, what's wrong with me? You know, like I'm okay now. And I just, I should be grateful, and what's wrong with me? And he said, well, you had to feel it sometime. And I think that, you know, for a long time, in the times when I should have been most afraid, I was sort of like, head down, let's get through this. And I'm sure there was some denial involved. And then, you know, time went on, and I started to just feel very afraid that, you know, I write about my return to running, and about how, because running was when this happened, there was this trauma associated with it, which, by the way, another time that aneurysms rupture is during sex, so I'm very glad that didn't happen. That would have been a far worse thing to be afraid of.
Your parents are here, keep that in mind.
They have grandchildren, they know. So, you know, running, I write about my first times out there going with Ellie because I was afraid, and then little by little he would leave me. And as soon as I'd be alone, I would start looking at the side of the road and saying to myself, okay, that person has a cell phone, that person can call 911. And certainly, you know, something I didn't mention is that my husband and I were just beginning to think about starting a family when this happened, when the aneurysm ruptured. And there's a lot in this in Stir about us getting back to the point of feeling ready to do that. And fear, you know, moms, I mean, my mom is like sitting right here, and I can tell you, like, I thought moms, they're supposed to be fearless. They're supposed to be, they're supposed to be, you know, the people who can handle anything. And I, for a while, thought, how can I be a mother if I am so fragile and so potentially broken again? And I had to come to terms with that. And I still struggle with it, although it gets better and easier with time.
So we want to leave time for questions, but I want to, this might be a good place to end. 2 quotes from you, and you can pick up on both or neither.
Okay.
You say, beginnings are everywhere. Any moment is a point A. That's your positive, Jess. And then you say, everything happens for a reason. Nope, I don't believe that.
Both are true. Yes, I mean, I think we probably covered the beginnings are everywhere. Just that, you know, that slipping off the treadmill, that slipping of that middle point becoming its own point A, that's something I certainly try to remember. And I guess the 2 are linked because, you know, some people do say, but it's so great, you get to be a writer now. and
People actually say that?
Yeah.
There are easier ways.
And you know, I don't believe that there are easier ways, and there are other ways. And it's certainly true that in the writing of this story, I have learned that I want to be a writer, that I hopefully am a writer, and I want to put words on the page like forever because I love it. But I like to hope that there were other routes to that point, and who knows, there are infinite ways to get to any given place. And that, I think, is actually related to the second thing about everything happens for a reason. Very early on, people started saying that to me from a place of the best and kindest and most loving intentions, usually followed up by, you know, their certainty that there would be a blessing in all of this. A neuropsychologist actually asked me at the very beginning when he was trying to see if I was all there cognitively when I was in rehab, you know, why do you think this happened? And I didn't understand what he was saying. I was like, well, there was a weak wall in the vessel, and he's not supposed to lead me. And so he just looked totally deadpan and said, no. Oh, no, he didn't say no. He just said, but why do you think this happened? And after a couple more rounds of, but why? Finally I said, I do not know what you're asking me. And he explained that some people believe that something like this happens for a reason. And I do not believe that everything happens for a reason. I believe only that things happen. And then other things happen. And then other things still. And what we make of those things that happen, that becomes the reason. And if anything, this life of mine that has unfolded since then is just evidence of that.
Well, thank you for sharing your beautiful story. And it's also, and we could go for hours, it's a beautiful love story about your husband and your children and your parents and your family and the kind of safety net that you had. It's pretty remarkable. So
It really
thank
is.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're gonna take questions, but we don't have mics for you. So you want to pick people, and then I'll just repeat the question so everybody can hear it.
Okay, yes.
Hi, thank you so much. I came here because I heard from NPR today, and you had some beautiful words about your husband, and my wife went through similar things like you, sort of being there from the other side, and I just wanted to ask if you could say something.
Oh, okay.
Did everybody hear him?
Sure. So, what is your name?
Jasper,
Jasper. Is your wife?
I left her at home. She's fine.
I see.
But
Okay.
I didn't want to take her.
Okay. Okay. Is she recovered or recovering?
She had 2 hemangiomas, and one of them was removed because it had to be because she had epilepsy,
I see.
and the other one is still there, but it's in a place where it could trigger something like.
I see. Well, thank you for sharing, and I'll say one thing about this. Right before I went into surgery, there's actually a whole dialogue that I tried very hard to remember and wrote and rewrote until I got it as close to what it actually was as I could possibly muster. You can read that dialogue in the book, but what I will tell you is that in this conversation about basically my telling my husband that if I woke up from the surgery not myself, that we were 28 years old and he needed to have a life. He needed to leave me. But as soon as we got through that conversation, actually while we were having it, a few minutes before they took me down, that's a crazy moment. They're like, you get a moment alone with your husband, and what the hell are you supposed to say to each other? I mean, what can you say that doesn't sound like goodbye? You know, I love you gets cloaked in this, it sounds like goodbye. And we had to get to a point in our conversation, which we do, and you can read it, where I love you actually means I love you and not goodbye. And I was flooded with gratitude because through that conversation, that moment in the hospital room, what I knew was that no matter what happened, if I died, if I came out totally brain dead, if for whatever reason he went on with life without me, nothing could touch the love that we had. Nothing could touch where we had been and where we were at that moment. And this thing, I mean, love, you know, it feels like this physical thing, and it certainly felt like something we could practically touch in the room that morning before the surgery. And I was just flooded with gratitude for him and went down into that surgery kind of floating on drugs and also that sense of gratitude.
Thank you.
Yes, hello. Hi.
When you came home from the hospital the first time, you spoke about aggressive gratitude for making dinner for your friends. And I was wondering, do you still feel that now, years later? Do you still feel happy when you spill milk because you're there to experience it? Or has enough time gone by where you get annoyed?
Great. Yes. So,
You all heard her?
So the question was about a
No,
term.
okay, wait a second. She wanted to, yeah. Oh, you go ahead. It's
Yeah,
your
sure,
turn.
she asks about a term that I say in the book, I write in the book, aggressive gratitude, which is, I say that, illness kind of thrusts us into this state of aggressive gratitude, and you start, it's supposed to be, I think, a good thing, apparently, some people say, to love every moment, and there's something very zen about it, I am sure. But the truth of the matter is that it's really no way to live, because my goal was really to get back to the point of getting frustrated when I stubbed my toe or burnt biscuits. And there's a moment in the book when, again, my friend Julia, brought over chicken, and she was fretting that her roast chicken is never as good as her mother's. I just loved that Julia, I had almost died like a few weeks before, and she's like complaining to me about chicken, and I was like, I love Julia. This is why I love her, because, to be able to talk like that meant that I was in the clear. And of course I wasn't, but I thought in the moment that I was. And yes, I am so back there, and I really, I try to be back there. I think that those little things that bug us, like the whole point is that we have to strive for gratitude. Like that's what we're doing as humans. And if we don't have that striving for it, it's not really worth that much at all, I don't think.
I was curious from a writer's standpoint on your statement about how you just wrote about episodes for months, and then maybe 8 months later you tried to make some sense and order out of it. I mean, as a person who studies literature and who's getting a PhD in it, was it a cathartic experience you thought that allowed you to do, or why did you do it that way? And then the other question is, that's a tough thing to do 8 months later, try to make structure out of so many beautiful, I'm sure.
Thank you. Well, actually, I'm sorry. So the question is about the writing process, about writing these episodes, and what it was like to then, I had this pile of episodes and note cards and beautiful mind type things, and then having to make something out of it and how to do that. My way to do it was that I threw it all away. And I started over, basically. But it wasn't really starting over. It was like I had it. And I should just say, so I had this writing partner. She and we met up every week, and we would read each other's stuff. And she lives in San Francisco now, but her parents, Dorcas and Yoshi, are here somewhere. And she actually made me feel brave to do that. And I would say anyone who's writing about anything, get yourself a writing partner, because that has been, I mean, frankly, one of the best and most meaningful experiences of my life, not to mention this book. I probably wouldn't be done with it yet, and it certainly wouldn't be in this form without her. And she helped me to trust that everything that I had written, all of these episodes, they were in there, and I had, learned. She is like the master rewriter, and
You literally started over?
Oh yes. I did. I emailed my editor and I said, I know I've emailed you a bunch of episodes. I probably had sent her about 30,000 words at that point in various forms, and she was like, "This is great stuff. Keep it coming." And I was like, "Okay, so just disregard all of that." And I just I started. But when I started over this time, I started from the beginning because I now knew what the beginning was.
So do you think you were ready?
Yes, I think I was ready. I think I had, well, you asked it, sorry, what is your name? John. So John asked about, he said, was it cathartic? And I actually shy away from that word only because of my own prejudices of thinking that word, entails a lot of, sobbing and weeping and moaning. And I didn't really do that very often, although sometimes. But what I did find is that it helped me to learn. I mean, I read this great book early on when I was writing this called Good Prose by Tracy Kidder and his brilliant editor for many years. What's his name? Something Todd. Does anyone know? Anyway, they wrote this book together. Yes, they wrote this book together. And don't buy my book, buy this book. It's this wonderful book. It's about writing, and it gives a window into the editorial relationship. And they write about memoir and about how the reader wants to hear you, striving on the page. And for me, if I went in and I knew that one of these chapters, what it was going to be in the end, it was going to be a really crappy chapter. And I needed to feel like I was learning as I was going. And even if, that's not to say I didn't have points that I wanted to make, but if at the end I hadn't taken that one step further, then I knew that it wasn't probably worth polishing to make it into something worth reading. So it wasn't a catharsis in the emotional sense, although maybe it is now that I can kind of say, this is this thing that happened to me. It's this thing that's kind of spinning out separately from me. And so it's really nice to be able to hold everything that happened in my hand a little bit away from my body. But certainly it was a working through in the sense of every chapter here that I wrote, I finished thinking, aha, that's it. Like, that's why, that felt that way, or that's why this relationship was important, or that's why this moment, or this bite of food, or this recipe was important.
Other questions? Quiet crowd.
Well, I think we were supposed to end at 8 anyway.
Is that right?
Anything else that you wanted to say?
Just thank you. I moved to San Francisco with my husband 5 or 6 months ago, and it's really nice out there, really quite nice. But it's not home. This is home, and being here just means the world to me. And thank you for coming out.
I think it's fair to say they were a little bit rattled seeing a woman there, but were friendly and nice, and but they were putting in the screws and I think trying to show off a little bit and screwing up here and there, stripping the screws, and sort of I was just like do, and feeling like particularly confident and badass.